this is Melissa. The title of my proposal is The Influence of Faculty-Student Interactions on the Development of Self-Efficacy in First-Generation Students. The problem I've identified is that there's a gap in the literature about first-generation students, specifically about the development of self-efficacy and how that is influenced by faculty interactions while in college. Self-efficacy is defined as an individual's belief in their own abilities, and it has been studied and shown that self-efficacy does influence student persistence in higher education. First-generation students have different needs than non-first-generation students, so they therefore have different obstacles to overcome in developing self-efficacy. In the review of the literature, I have categorized all the literature into 4 major themes. The first is classroom interactions, then other interactions, and then on the next slide, we will discuss institutional type and faculty development. Under the first category for classroom interactions, these studies specifically examined the faculty-student relationship in the classroom environment. I've highlighted 2 here for you. That's not all that I've studied or that exists in literature, but there are 2 ones that illustrate the type of research in that area. The first one is quantitative in design, and it analyzes the interactions between faculty and students in an online classroom. So it identifies the type and the number of interactions in a digital environment. The other listed design is qualitative in nature, and that involves various interviews conducted with students to identify factors that influence retention for low socioeconomic status students. So you can see that both quantitative and qualitative research designs have been used to examine faculty-student interaction in the classroom. The next category is other interactions, which is interactions outside of the classroom. So some of these studies examined mentoring relationships that are informal in nature, and others use larger data sets to capture that interaction type with faculty. One of the studies used survey methods to illustrate whether or not the National Study of Student Engagement accurately assessed what students identified as valuable, and another study used a large longitudinal data set to analyze factors that affect persistence and degree attainment for STEM students. Another quantitative measure used a survey to analyze relationships of mentors with African American and Latino students specifically. The next category is institutional type, and in that section I grouped the studies that specifically focused on different types of institutions and examining the faculty-student relationship. Both of the listed studies focused on community college settings, but other types do exist. The first examined background variables for community college students to identify psychosocial variables that affect persistence at those institutions. And the next study analyzed faculty-student involvement to identify variables that can be used to predict those interactions. The next category is faculty development, and I found several studies that focus specifically on what institutions can do in the faculty development realm to better help students. The first study presented a model for faculty development that can serve as a tool to influence and promote student achievement. And that was a great case study of a specific institution that implemented professional development procedures and course type development work for all faculty so that they could develop tools that allow them to better assist students and promote student achievement. The next study analyzed informal, so outside of the classroom, faculty-student interactions to develop a best practices for mentoring. So again, these studies are looking at what institutions can do to better help faculty develop in working with students. The purpose of my study is to qualitatively examine with a case study the influence of faculty-student interaction on the development of self-efficacy in first-generation students. Tinto's theory of student departure sets the theoretical framework for this study. Tinto's theory recognizes pre-college factors and during college factors and the influence on those factors on student outcomes. Tinto's theory is specifically related to student departure, so whether or not the student remains in college, and I intend to use that theory to examine the pre-college factor of first-generation status combined with the during college factor of interaction with faculty to examine the influence on student outcomes, specifically the development of self-efficacy. And I do think that theory best frames the study of the development of self-efficacy in first-generation students because it highlights the two major factors and the outcome of self-efficacy that I want to examine. The research questions that I hope to answer are listed here, but basically I want to ask questions that do more than quantitatively number the type of faculty-student interactions that occur on campuses. I want to really dig into the quality of these responses. So, what do students gain from these relationships if they gain anything? So I intend to start with these questions and then kind of build off of those to dig at the quality of the relationships in the faculty-student interactions. The methodology I plan to use is a case study approach, which is a qualitative design. I think the case study approach is the best approach for this study because the experience of first-generation students and the interactions with faculty really needs to be qualitatively examined in depth. In the past, it's been quantitatively examined and qualitatively a little bit, but I think it needs an in-depth approach to really get at the questions that I'm trying to answer and highlight in the development of self-efficacy. A case study is bounded by time and activity, so I will keep that in mind in my research design. The data collection I plan to use is mostly interviews and focus groups. I do plan to outline the interview and focus group protocol in the appendix of my full proposal so that there's little room for question and error about the protocol and procedures that I've taken in the interviews and focus groups. I intend to take detailed field notes of each session in addition to audio recordings of each session. My sample will include 10 first-generation students from NC State. I plan to select one from each college at NC State so that each college is represented, and I hope to select students that are in their third or fourth year of undergraduate education, so they're not brand new first-generation students, but they're experienced and they have had time to develop any sort of faculty relationships. I plan to analyze my data in two separate ways: during the data collection and after the data collection. During the data collection, I do plan to read through all of my notes after each interview and focus group to see if any themes emerge, and I plan to make note of that. But then at the end of all the data collection, I do plan to read through all of the sources and data again, and then identify any emergent themes with the use of coding. So hopefully coding those major themes will allow me to better organize my thoughts and write the final results for the paper. With a case study, it's important to keep in mind the role of the researcher, and As the interview and focus group facilitator, I will be regularly interacting with the participants, so it's important to keep in mind any potential biases I may have. And I will disclose that I was a first-generation college student, so I plan to be careful to ensure that my experiences as a first-generation student don't cloud my judgment for the students that I plan to interview. And I also acknowledge that I had interactions with faculty while I was an undergraduate that were valuable and some that were not so valuable. But I also intend to, again, not let my experiences cloud my judgment of receiving all of the information that I gained from the interviews and focus groups, and then drawing conclusions from that data. This study does have potential significance for higher education. I expect that this study will enhance the literature about first-generation students. Not really been discussed in the first-generation literature, so I think it will fill a gap there so that institutions can better understand first-generation students and their development. I also think the study will fill a gap in the literature about faculty development, because it hasn't previously been examined, the influence of faculty development on the development of self-efficacy. I do expect that that will for faculty so that they may be better prepared to interact with first-generation students and mentor those students and provide resources for those students that may be different from non-first generation students. So I do feel that this proposal has significance to fill gaps in the literature, and I look forward to the data collection and beginning the research process. Thank you.